Afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. So I'm Nancy Golden. I'm the Chief Education Officer, and we'll be doing some introductions later to the guest we have today who's going to share with us what they've done in the areas we're looking into from some other states. But I do want to make one special introduction since this is really about post-secondary education, high school to post-secondary, because I have an intern with me from Mount Holyoke. So this is Madeline, and she actually has worked for the Roosevelt Center in New York City, and she's published policy in her sophomore year of college. So when we think of these powerful internships and what we can do to make learning really authentic, Madeline's really worked on that. So she gets to be with me for 2 weeks and then go back to college. So any other introductions that we need to do? Yeah. Okay, can we just know who's on the phone?
John Huffman.
Representative Huffman and
Nori Juba from Bend.
okay, Nori.
Richard Donovan, Committee Administrator.
Okay, Richard. Anybody else?
Tim Stutter from the University of Washington.
Great, thank you. We have anyone else on the phone?
Yeah, Teresa Dewson from Education Northwest.
Thank you, Teresa. Okay, Seth, you want to do roll call? We know we have 2 committee members here already, so.
Senator Marpass?
Aye.
Senator Bruce Starr?
Here.
Representative Lou Frederickson?
Here.
Representative John Huffman? Nori Juba?
He's here.
Peyton Chapman?
Here.
Nancy Golden?
Here. Okay. So I want to make sure we all take a chance to look at the agenda and see if anyone has anything they want to add to the agenda. We do have one correction, which is just one of our out-of-town guests we didn't know would be here, and they are going to be here. So when Hilda makes introductions, she'll talk to that too. Anybody had any changes for the agenda? Do we actually move towards approval of the agenda? Okay. So let's just move toward, anybody want to say I approve the agenda, and we'll second that and move forward?
I move to approve the agenda.
And do I have a second?
Second that.
Senator Haas, so we'll move forward. Okay, next we have to take a few minutes just to look over the minutes before we do approval of the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
It's been moved by Representative Fredericks, and do I hear a second?
Second.
Senator Haas seconds that. All in favor? The minutes are...
Aye.
Aye, okay, great. The minutes are approved. So, Hilda, you want to just... Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some follow-up information from the last meeting. We sent another urgent follow-up to the presidents and vice presidents of the Northwest Commission on College and Universities, requesting follow-up on January 8th meeting. If you remember what that topic was, is as we really think about College Now classes and accreditation, and there's been some concerns that there would be problems with accreditations if we were to change how, particularly at the community college level, we look at allowing high school teachers to teach college courses. And so we have put out urgent requests to the organization to let us know if there's any problem. But so far we haven't heard back, so we might have to show up on their doorsteps,
I know. I've been called a bulldog. I will stay on this one.
Okay, so Hilda, we know you'll take care of that, right, between
Yes.
now and the next meeting. So now, if we just look at agenda item 5, basically what you're going to see is between agenda item 5 and 9, today we're really going to spend time with our out-of-state guests. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Hilda
And before I move into item 5, I just wanted to follow up. At our last meeting, we also updated you on a memo that went out to all of the superintendents and all of the presidents of the community colleges regarding the state board rule that had occurred. And in talking with Gerald Hamilton, he had said that he'd gotten some responses back and wanted to know if you'd like him to share what he's learned to date. This was to make sure that people were aware of what the change was and what they were planning to do with that.
Would committee members be interested in hearing a little bit about the results? Sure. Okay, so Gerald, if you just want to come up, state your name, share a little bit exactly what is the context of these results.
Right. Hello, my name is Gerald Hamilton, for the record. And this was a letter that, if you recall from the last meeting, we sent, Rob Saxon and I sent to the superintendents and presidents as a result of a superintendent's meeting that we had in December, and we have another one late January, and asking them to some questions about, did they know about the change in the rules, and were they implementing that change? And well, I don't.
Can you just state what rules you're talking
well,
about?
I'm sorry. Rules around dual credit qualifications for high school teachers to teach dual credit courses, and giving some more additional flexibility to the colleges to waive that rule. The rule that requires a master's degree or a bachelor's in 9 hours in the subject matter. So the bottom line and the results, and I just have gotten those in the last couple of days, so I haven't collated them, I haven't done anything, but I did grab them this morning. And all I have is a community college president's one. We're still waiting on some more data from the superintendents, but almost every community college president, or I guess everyone save one, has responded, and they'll get a call from me tomorrow around that. And it certainly appears that they're aware of the change. Most are in the process of looking at that in terms of their own policies and how that will affect their collaborations, their K-12. They all suggest that at this point they haven't had them long enough and the changes haven't occurred enough to really affect their methodology of work, how their work is transpiring. But they believe that the changes are something that they will absorb in their policies, and that they will allow them to move forward, I think, and make it easier for them to approve those courses. And so at this point, that's kind of a quick down and dirty of what I know so far. I'll certainly in the next month put this together in some kind of collated manner and get that feedback to you. So I'll certainly answer questions.
Questions, anyone? Okay, so we look forward to getting it synthesized so that we can take a look at it in a closer look at it.
All right, thank you.
We also have someone who's left a phone. So does this look familiar to anyone?
Yeah, actually.
Oh.
Thank you.
All right. So Chair Golden and members of the committee, I'm delighted to welcome a group of colleagues with whom I've had a couple of conversations and a lot of emails. And through our collaboration through, first of all, the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, we realized at the last commission meeting that there are a lot of similarities between where Washington is and where Oregon is. However, our colleagues to the north have some track record behind them on several initiatives, and they are in the process of convening a very similar process to what we're working on, and felt that there would be some real benefit in coming together to talk through what some of their lessons are that they're reflecting on, and where their major concerns are, and the solutions that they're posing to address the very same questions that we have, which is our big concept of helping more students in Oregon access college credit-bearing courses. So I'm very delighted to welcome up to the table here so that they can walk you through how they've organized materials that they're sharing with you. They're going to be focusing on some legislation that has been passed, as well as specific work that their collaborative work group has undertaken. You all were given a copy of the roadmap. I found it very instructional. It sounded similar to what I'm reading with the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission's work. And then also, they're going to have a chance to talk about their, my goodness, 13 years of Washington Running Start, somewhere around there, as well as we have a phone-in person who will talk a little bit about specifically what the University of Washington is doing. So it's a pleasure to welcome Randy first, and I'm going to let you, first of all, tell us a little bit about your responsibilities and introduce your colleagues here. And
Certainly.
thank you for making the trip down from Olympia.
Absolutely. It was a lovely drive. Thank you very much. We only got lost once this time in Portland, so my name is Randy Spalding. I'm Director of Academic Affairs and Policy with the Washington Student Achievement Council. And the Washington Student Achievement Council is the SHIO agency for the state. It's a new agency, replaced the Higher Education Coordinating Board, but it's got a different composition, and I can come back and talk a little bit more about how our council is structured, and a little bit different mission. It's a more explicit mission around the high school to college transition than what our predecessor agency had. And so we're very excited. One of the really neat things is we now have the various sectors that we're supposed to be overseeing and coordinating on our council, which we did not have previously. So this is a nice place to start. I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves. I did want to just mention on your agenda we're broken up into 3 chunks, but we have 1 PowerPoint. And so if it's okay, we're going to kind of integrate some of that, but we'll pause along the way so that we can have some discussion and questions as we're going through this. So with that, I'm going to go to my left and let Jim introduce himself, and then we'll just go down the line here.
My name is Jim West. I work for the Washington Student Achievement Council, and I'm Associate Director in Policy Planning and Research. Academic Affairs is a focus. Dual credit, dual enrollment, transfer and articulation are my areas of policy interest.
And I'm Mike Hubert. I'm the Director of Guidance and Counseling at our State Superintendent's Office, K-12. And I work primarily around dual credit and guidance and counseling, career guidance kinds of issues.
Noreen Light, Associate Director of Academic Affairs and Policy at the Student Achievement Council, and my background is in professional development with faculty in the community and technical college system. And I work at the Student Achievement Council in dual credit, prior learning assessment, and anything else that Randy puts on my desk.
Tim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Stetter. I'm with the University of Washington, and I'm an assistant director here within educational outreach, which is the outreach arm of the university. And one of our major outreach programs is called the UW in the High School program that I'll tell you a little bit about later on in the meeting. So I oversee some of the partnerships with our high schools and work with teachers and principals as well as academic units here on campus to ensure that those courses in the high school are up to UW standards. So I look forward to talking with you more later.
So what I'd like to do is just give kind of a broad overview of our goals and the roadmap and a little bit of background on dual credit in Washington, and then Mike's going to go into some depth about the numbers, and then we'll talk about the strategies that we've identified moving forward and go on from there. So you have the copy of the roadmap. Oh, it's not working. Oh, there it went. Okay. So the big goal in the roadmap, it's actually explicit in our statute is charge to raise educational attainment in the state, which is kind of nice. It takes off the table one of the things that agencies like ours fought in the past is whether or not you need to raise educational attainment. That's a given in our statute, and so we can move ahead from there. And then the question is how much and how do we do it? And that's really what we tried to grapple with in the roadmap. And we set goals which are admittedly aggressive. Our goal for high school completion is that everyone should complete high school. And I think you have a similar goal here in Washington, or Oregon. So from a practical standpoint, we may or may not get there, but we certainly don't see what number you would choose below 100% as your aspirational goal. So that's part of how we got there. Currently, we're at 89%, which actually surprised a lot of us when we took and looked at the data. We were surprised, saying, well, we're a lot closer than we thought, because, you know, when you look at dropout rates and these sorts of things, you seem to think you're further from the goalpost than you really are. But there are a number of other ways to get a high school equivalency or to complete a high school credential, and so that does happen over time. And then for post-secondary completions, we set a 70% goal, and that includes degrees as well as certificates that have economic value. And so we really struggle with that one, because as folks who've dove into the data on this recognize that the data is not there in the census, so it's really hard to get a good picture of who actually has these credentials. And so we relied on some work from Georgetown that looked at estimates of how many people had certificates as their highest level of attainment to kind of get the ballpark down. We're hoping we'll be able to get better data in the future as we track this going forward. But at any rate, that's kind of the groundwork. And, you know, this need to get basically a year of college and a credential is the way we used to refer to this, and that's been pretty well ingrained in the Washington system for a number of years, and it led to some legislation a couple years ago, struggling a little, oh, there it goes, which was the Launch Year Act in 2011, and that was really aimed, that was a big look at what are we doing with dual credit, and how can we get more students engaged in and successful in dual credit coursework. And it was sort of an alternative to a 13th year approach, but the idea was that every student should have access to up to a year of college or college credit work while still in high school. And it built some requirements around that to ensure that the programs were available, and also built some requirements that actually come in the subsequent year around putting information out for students so that they know what courses would count and how they would count when they move on to further post-secondary education. And as you can see, there's been additional work in academic acceleration, which is designed to really get students encouraged or automatically enrolled in these more rigorous courses. And as we go through these pieces, Mike can fill in a little more detail on some of this. This is his area of expertise, because he has to deal with the schools on this, right, Mike?
And I think as we talked about this, we said that if you have questions as we go through this, please ask questions.
So this is an area where we've had a lot of interest, but and we do have increasing numbers of students taking advantage of dual credit, but we still identified some challenges, and I'm going to talk more about this in a few minutes when we talk about the issues we identified in the roadmap. But you know, the number of people who start in a dual credit course and the number of students who actually get credit, there's a big difference between those numbers in some programs, and so that was an issue we were really struggling with. And then there are a lot of different approaches to dual credit. I'll as I said, after Mike goes through some numbers here, I'll talk about, actually no, it's the next slide. I should know my own presentation, right? So we have 6 primary programs that we're using in Washington. And 3 are what you might consider within local control, and 3 are really outside local control in a sense. So the top 3, Running Start, College and High School, and Tech Prep, are all models where we can kind of control how that's delivered, where it's delivered. And in the case of the first 2, Running Start and College and High School, we have some statutory guidance and some rules around those as well. Tech Prep was a federal program that was no longer funded, and but we're still using that model in Washington. So all 3 of these, though, give us an opportunity to kind of shape how they're delivered and how to make it easier for students to get into and through these programs and ensure they get credit. And that's really what the focus of our policy work is. The other 3, Advanced Placement, IB, and Cambridge, the issue there is really getting students access to the curriculum and getting them access to the exams that are necessary to get college credit. And so it's a little different problem there, but because it's a little harder for us to shape, but we have some districts that are doing a lot of work to encourage many more students to go into those programs. So Mike, did you want to add anything to this?
You've got us off to a great start.
Okay. This is actually where I hand it over to Mike, but I can pause and see if you have questions before I do that. We're going to dive into data.
One of the questions that I was curious about is whether or not as you look at 4, 5, and 6, you had to do some changes around access across the state to make that more equitable. And I know that I looked at the rural initiative that you shared, and I assume that you might reference that later.
Yeah, and that's one that we might want to follow up on and get those folks out if you want to dive deeper into that. But those 3 programs in particular, we have some districts that are doing getting students basically automatically enrolled into these programs and encouraging all students to go into AP, for example. But the other thing on these is that and this was the one of the bills that passed, was really around communication about these programs, so that it was very clear when students were going to receive credit at what point. And again, so if we stay with AP for the example, and that's where we've done the most work because it's the most participating schools and the biggest volume of students going through that among those 3 programs. And so there, we have a listing on our website that basically shows how every institution, every public institution, I should say, and some of our privates are using those credits. And we can say right up front, if you have a 3 or higher, you're going to get some college credit for it. And that in itself is very helpful. But then the next question is how much college credit, and does it count towards general ed? And that's where the variability really starts, because 4 and a 5 may garner more credit at some institutions than others, and in some cases, a 4 or 5 might be required for it to count for a general ed requirement, but a 3 would count for general elective, for example. And go ahead.
So how are high school teachers able to teach courses that allow students to get credit? And I'm talking particularly from your community colleges.
So there's 2 avenues. For the community colleges are relying primarily on the Running Start model. Mm-hmm. And Tech Prep is another piece. But the Running Start model is a model, and I should have described these. So in Running Start, in general, the student goes to the community college campus, enrolls in a community college course, and receives credit for that. The credit is then also recognized as part of their high school curriculum. So that's that model. The college and the high school model is college faculty teaching in a high school building generally. There's some activities occurring, particularly in Running Start, occurring in high school buildings, which is confusing things for us a little bit. But in general, Running Start's in a college building. College and high school is in a high school building. Usually what happens in college and the high school is it's a high school teacher who's got some authority to teach through the university, so they have to go through a process to get approved to teach. And then Tech Prep is a little more intense articulation process and courses.
In fact, those are spelled out in statute for both the college and the high school, as well as the Running Start programs, that the college has ultimate authority on establishing qualified.
So the high school instructor is teaching as an adjunct for the college or university.
Do you mind talking into the mic? We do
sorry.
have people on the phone, and you're a little bit hard to hear.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that the instructor teaching at the high school would be an adjunct faculty member of the college or university.
I don't know if you're going to get into this, and I hate to be the first one to bring up the tawdry subject of money, but we have an issue here where we fund our K-12 system separately from community colleges and universities, and that's been a real dilemma for us to figure out how to pay the community colleges or how to remove this sort of disincentive to K-12s to let their kids go free to do the community colleges. So how does that part of it work?
Yeah, that varies by program as well. So in the Running Start model, the funds flow from the K-12 school to the university to pay for the cost of that program, and but they get funded an enhanced FTE. It's 1.2. Is that correct?
Current 1.2 as of about 3 years ago. Prior to that, it was 2.0 FTE. And
So
there are additional accommodations for students that may be enrolled in their high school, as well as in what we have in Washington Skills Centers for the career technical education that can be enhanced to a 1.6 FTE.
So you did it through your formula, your school funding formula?
Yes, correct. And in the case of Running Start, so that the money follows the student. However, for the school district that maintains a responsibility even for those students that elect to go to the college, let's say full-time or even part-time, there's still a guidance responsibility that falls to the school district, and so there's of that FTE assignment, 7% is retained by the school district for purposes of maintaining the records and providing the guidance, because that's a critical part to any kind of dual credit success. Is that
So if you have, say, a junior in high school who wants to access some of these classes, say it's just one, does that still get the higher formula? Is it different if it's 2 or 3? Or?
Right. For a typical example, in the state of Washington, in a school that normally has 6-period day, 5 of those are state funded. 5 of those 6 periods are state funded. The 6th period right now is locally funded. And that creates the 1.0 FTE. So with the 1.2 cap, the potential is that student could take a 3-credit class at the college, and that would be covered under the basic ed apportionment. Now, in the state of Washington, the community college system, and I'll have to, Jim, you could probably dial in on the baccalaureates, but they have elected for students that are on free and reduced lunch program or eligible to grant waivers for additional credits so that they can take greater advantage of the Running Start program.
So not all the public baccalaureates in the state of Washington are authorized to provide Running Start. University of Washington is one that is not authorized to do Running Start, so they have moved into the college and the high school program. But for those, generally they follow the same policies, I guess, that they would at the community and technical colleges.
So a couple other points, and we can talk more about this, I think, as we start talking about our options. College and high school model, the tuition is the responsibility of the student. We have some districts that are covering that. I just learned today, actually, but generally that's the responsibility of the student, not the school. And then in Running Start, there's actually in law, there is some authority to charge additional fees, but none of our institutions are doing that. So that was part of that reduction from 2.0 to 1.2, gave them authority that they've not exercised, at least yet.
Did you all do a cost analysis? I would love to see an Excel spreadsheet that took a look at all the costs per credit for IB, for example. So if you already have an IB teacher, they don't necessarily have to have a master's or approved by any college, but the student has to pay for each test. Each test bears a certain number of college credits. So what is the cost then per credit per student overall versus paying a college teacher to come do, for example, with a PSU senior inquiry class, you're paying a college professor, you're paying your teacher of record, and then you're also, the students are paying the course credit fees, which were, reasonable, but what does it actually come out? It would be interesting to see if ID for all students for 9 credits could potentially be less expensive than even involving the community colleges. But then, you have the cost potentially of becoming an IB world school. But did anybody look at all of the factors, all of the costs, and then break it down to see what it would be per child to achieve the number of credits?
I've not seen an analysis that compares the programs on a cost basis.
Some have FTE costs, some have college FTE costs, some have the credit costs, and some have just your regular teacher. It might actually be that either AP or IB could achieve the same goal of earning 9 college credits with
So
either significant or more significant cost.
I could make this a little bit more complex. And first of all, AP and IB through the federal government do have a test fee waiver program, so that is some assistance to the states. And of course, there's been some challenges around timeliness of when those decisions get made back in DC that impact that. I think on the Running Start, one of the things that's emerging in the state of Washington is that we are seeing more and more of outreach from our higher ed folks to provide Running Start opportunities in high school settings. Especially this kind of initiated really around some of our rural and isolated districts where students accessing community colleges created issues of access because of transportation 50 miles away and disruption to the rest of their programs. And so it's very clear that in our understanding of at least Washington statute that where the Running Start course take place is not it's not prescriptive that it has to be on the college campus. That it can be in a community center, can be in a high school classroom, and so forth. And so there's been some significant outreach on the part of trying to bring that program with that enhanced funding FTE to kind of help those rural isolated districts that otherwise are making some tough judgments about what dual credit programs do we offer that allow us to continue to service in a comprehensive way our student body and provide these kinds of rigorous opportunities. So.
I also just wanted to apologize. I have to present at City Council down the road, and so I hate to miss your presentation, but they're going to send you the minutes to me. Thank you for being here.
Numbers?
Yeah, you want to take them into the data?
All right. So on the slide that, and for those that are not in the room, the slide that we're looking at right now is actually what we call our school report card in the state of Washington. We have this publicly posted at a state level, by district level, and by every school in the state. The particular report you're seeing right now it deals with dual credit enrollment, and the larger school report card contains achievement data and demographic data and other kinds of special program participations. But this one was designed around dual credit opportunities because, in fact, in our legislation over the last 23 years since Running Start kicked in 1990, there's just been one piece of legislation after another, and a state school board that's wanted to move to a college and career diploma and the kinds of coursework that's been involved there. The launch year was an expression of that. Most recently, we had an academic acceleration bill, 1642, that passed that created really the four elements that reinforces, I think, some policy decisions that have been made by the state board and our state agency, OSPI, about college and career readiness. In this particular program, it encourages local school districts to develop an academic acceleration board policy that moves students automatically based upon achievement of competence on the statewide assessment at 11th grade as we go into Smarter Balance to go to next most rigorous coursework in that subject area with a parent opt-out provision. And so there's that encouragement that we want to engage students more fully, as was the intent around the launch year a couple of years previous to that, to continue to do that. Part of that is because it's the right thing to do by kids. There's a judgment call on my part as a former school counselor of some years. But the other part of that conversation was we feel it's an accountable thing to do. The State Board of Education has been very thoughtful about what is required for a student to be successful in transition to post-secondary opportunities, and have built graduation requirements along with that. And that includes not just credit requirements, but non-credit requirements, like a high school and beyond plan, and accommodating project related to that high school and beyond plan, so that there's intention and there's guidance that's associated with helping students navigate these opportunities. So I think that's been a great piece. We're currently funding schools through a grant program to be able to identify, especially those students, those schools that are working with underrepresented student populations that, as you'll see, exist in some of our dual credit data, and students on free and reduced lunch, to see what are some of the strategies that you're working and what are the impacts of those specific strategies for those specific groups of students, so that we can get some sense of emerging practices and promising practices and get that word out to the field. So that's also part of the legislative intent. With our ESEA waiver that went through, our Educational Secondary Education Act waiver that went through in July, one of the pieces of that calls for dual credit participation. And so with that, the State Board of Education, in partnership with the OSPI, is revising what we call an achievement index. It's a way of kind of measuring what's happening in the schools. And at fourth grade, it's dealing with reading and math, and eighth grade, it goes on to additional math. And high school gets to dual credit participation and graduation rates. Some very basic kinds of things. But again, dual credit emerges as something that's absolutely critical. And we know that from the research that talks to us about perseverance and about student engagement and giving students these experiences while we have an opportunity in our K-12 system to be able to wrap around them with supports and guidance that's in an environment that's conducive to being able to provide that and supervise more closely as they make these transitions. So all of those kinds of policy things and legal things that have been happening have kind of pointed the way for some of this work to occur. So what will be happening, one of the things that will be happening to this report card a year from now, not only will you see enrollment data by dual credit program, but you will begin to see how many students that took AP got 3 or higher on their exam. How many that took IB got 4 or higher on their exam. How many college credits were earned by college and the high school running START. And so we're going to start, and Tech Prep will be part of that, Cambridge program will be part of that. So we're going to begin to get that kind of transparency, because it's very clear that the primary players that make up the Washington Student Achievement Council have been very clear about this is what we need to be doing for students. And there's an efficiency to it, we think, around dollar investment. We think there's an efficiency to student engagement, and so good for Washington. So our numbers. So as you can see, I'm sorry, questions?
Oh. My name is David Edwards. I'm the Director of Research and Policy for the Oregon Education Investment Board. I'm just curious about your plan to collect data, especially about AP and IB scores. Federal privacy laws forbid you from asking students directly for that information. I mean, students have to volunteer it. I mean, those scores don't come automatically to you, so I'm curious how you're going to collect all that data.
Well, I know that there are data sharing agreements that have been set up with College Board, and we're in the process of finalizing one with the IB organization.
Okay.
And so I would have to get back to you about more detail in terms of how our student information folks are going to translate that and protect the FERPA considerations for the individual student and still be able to provide the data for profiling a high school, obviously numbers less than 10 and some of the other kinds of issues that really begin to compromise the intention of FERPA is certainly something we would respect. But I think one of the things that's going to occur, also part of this academic acceleration bill that just passed this last year, is that starting this next June, it's actually unduplicated count and success with these indicators that I've talked about in these different programs will generate some dollars. Right now it's a very small amount, I think $475,000 that'll be tied to those indicators on an unduplicated count. Dollars will go back to the district to go to that high school to develop dual credit programs. And so again, they're kind of getting their feet wet and being more hands-on about building opportunities. We'll measure that as it goes along, and that'll inform their future policy decisions. So this is what's been happening in advanced placement, Cambridge. What you're seeing, if you're not in the room, is that there has been some significant growth. Obviously, some programs are larger than others. A Running Start, which has grown by about 4% in the last couple of years. That is one that up until 3 years ago, schools and colleges could take advantage of 2.0 full-time equivalents in terms of apportionment. At that time, and things got pretty tight with state budgets, and so it was knocked down to 1.2 combined. And so the rate of growth began to decline, but there is still continues to be growth in that sector of dual credit. And I think some of the reaching out to the rural isolated schools by the community colleges and the baccalaureates that are eligible to provide Running Start opportunities has begun to make, I think, an impact in bringing in more of those numbers.
Have you done this analysis by rural versus?
No, we have not.
That seems
Not
like
this
that
one.
would be very
It's a great question to
interesting
take to
see.
ERDC, which I will.
Okay.
ERDC is our Educational Research Data Center, which perhaps in some ways parallels what your work is. No?
I doubt they're a department of one.
Oh, I'm not sure they have a whole lot more, but they have a few. So anyway, I think other things that are notable in what you see there is Cambridge is, although it shows a huge rate of growth of 461%, basically we have two schools, Juanita High School and I think Federal Way High School, that have started these programs all within the last 2 years. And so those students are just now getting to a point where you can begin to get data that makes it dual credit eligible in those programs.
Yeah, I think Federal Way started 3 years ago.
3 years
so
ago.
they've built up, now they have not just one class, but 3 classes of people that are going through, and Juanita would be brand new.
Thank you. And I think the other notable piece, International Baccalaureate, is N of 16 public high schools in the state of Washington currently. And then, of course, Running Start we've talked about, and Tech Prep eligible. These numbers have declined a bit. I think one of the things I'll point out, and I don't know if it's going to be in one of these other slides. Oh, is there?
Seth said that he will just give him a signal. Your thing is not,
Oh,
your
you're
clicker is
doing
not
that?
working.
Sweet. All right. So this slide basically shows what our N is for the state of Washington. We have seen, so as you look at these other growth patterns, individual programs, you can see that 11th and 12th grade, which right now under statute, Running Start and college and the high school are restricted to those grade levels currently. And those are just statutes that have been in for a while, and that's what they call for. However, the other dual credit enrollment programs are open 9 to 12. And in fact, in advanced placement, the 9th and 10th grade enrollments have really shot up in the last couple of years. And I think in part that may be due to some of the changes in gifted program and the requirements for districts to provide services in that area for all eligible students. And some of these dual credit programs have been identified as strategies at the high school level to do some of that work.
We should mention, too, that we anticipate a bill to allow 10th graders into the Running Start in college and high school this session.
Oh.
Okay.
But overall, we've seen a 7% increase in the number of dual credit courses being offered. So we see that schools are deepening their engagement around providing opportunities. And so message is getting through. Next slide. This one just always breaks my heart. So not everybody gets it. There are barriers. There are challenges to how all of this comes together, even though we have a diversity of programs. I think some of the strategies are making a positive impact, as we talked about, Running Start in the high school. We've talked about this recent legislation that's going to recognize achievement by local schools in bringing on dual credit and getting performance standards met. So I think we're going to see some of those things. We've got some work to do. Tech Prep is one of those areas where we continue to see probably the closest alignment between our demographic profile statewide at the high school level and student participation in a dual credit program. And yes, sir.
I'm just curious about what your demographic profile. We'd love to see what your demographic profile is compared to what you have in terms of response to this. Now I'm talking about how many Latino students do you have? Percentage participation with that as well.
The percentage of the whole.
The percentage of the whole.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, oh, okay, yeah. I don't have that data with me. I will, I can send it down.
If you would, that'd be
Okay. Okay. That is data that we can also get off our school report card. And so I might even be able to do it in the back of the room here after this. So this shows what has happened there. Again, some of the ends, the original ends are fairly small in terms of overall student population. But that nonetheless, every one of those kids has a name and has a story that we want to help them create. So the next slide. Gender, fairly close. Continues, again, to be that moderate growth overall. I apologize that I have my 2013 hyphenated. I'm not sure why the bilingual programs is, okay. So we've got some work to do. That's all I can say. Gifted programs, I think that's tied to the change in the definitions. That's where we've seen that 139% growth. Free reduced lunch eligible, students that have that eligibility, we have seen 10.5% growth over the last 2 years. And so,
Probably worth mentioning, and this may affect be part of what's behind free and reduced lunch, but wouldn't tell the whole story. Is that we implemented a scholarship a few years ago called the College Bound Scholarship, which is essentially an early commitment of state need grant money. And those cohorts are starting to roll, complete high school and move on to college. We now have two cohorts of students who signed up by 8th grade who have now gone on to college, and so that's had a pretty significant impact on both high school completion rates and college continuation rates. We haven't looked separately at whether it's affecting their dual credit participation, but I think you can infer that it probably is if it's affecting those other things positive.
They know in 8th grade they're going to receive some scholarship to go forward?
Yeah, so basically what we do is we tell them in 8th grade, if you're on free and reduced lunch, then your tuition will be covered at a public institution in Washington. And they have to maintain grades, and they have to take the core curriculum and so forth, but it's a pretty clear communication to students about what their eligibility will be when they move on.
I think that's a population that we're aiming at. You know, we do dual credits. We have these programs in Oregon. We just don't have a uniform system. And part of our dilemma is the kids who you would suspect would, the higher achievers tend to be the ones who amass credits, and the free and reduced lunch population just don't participate for all kinds of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of our goals not only is to make it uniform, as you've done with Running Start, but to get participation in that population.
Yeah, I think we found that taking the financial question off the table seems to change behavior. We're getting pretty high sign-up rates, so it's high enough rates of sign-up now that I don't think you can say we're creaming. So I think it is changing behavior.
Well, I think this is the second cohort that's...
this year.
This year's freshman as a second cohort, includes the second cohort.
And
yeah.
what we found out is that there was an expectation that a certain percent were expected to go to community colleges, a smaller percent were expected to go to the four-year baccalaureate institutions, and that was really completely blown up in that there was a huge number of individuals in this group that went to baccalaureate institutions unexpectedly.
I'm curious about why you decided to choose 8th grade and not earlier.
So they can sign up in 7th or 8th, so it's middle school sign up. And I think it was probably have to talk to the legislators that passed the bill, but there was I think they wanted to be as close to, get the students to where they're fairly close to making those decisions about going on, and at a point where it's still early enough to change behavior, but also at a point where they're still signing up for free and reduced lunch, because we know when they go to high school they're a lot less likely to be in the program. And so the means test actually doesn't occur until they're going into college. That's when we actually look at their eligibility, but they don't have to be participating in free and reduced. They just have to be eligible at that point.
One of the things that exists currently as well is that the College Bound Scholarship is administered by the Washington Student Achievement Council, but we do have a data sharing agreement with them to get the names of those students that have signed up for the College Bound Scholarship out to each of those schools. And when the student transfers, then that information will follow. And based upon that, and the Washington Student Achievement Council has just been awesome about helping us build strategies to provide guidance to continue to gauge those students, to let them know we've got their back, we've got your back, we believe that you can. And it's just a very powerful 1-2 punch. It's not just the money, but it's the belief that you can. And that's, I think, making a difference.
We've also had some NGOs and other community organizations they've kind of circled around this program and used it both encouraging signups and encouraging students to take the right curriculum and ensure they go on to college. So.
Yeah, the baccalaureate institutions can also request the names of those individuals so they can start recruiting those students, perhaps students that they would have never recruited before, really early in the process, just to get students thinking about going on to college.
And that wasn't what we came to talk about, but one other aside that we did, because we have this list of names, we talked to both College Board and ACT and got them to proactively guarantee that they get waivers from test fees, and so we are now sending a letter out to 11th graders that includes a whole bunch of information, part of which is how to get your waiver. So, because we know their rules are if you're free and reduced, you get a waiver, so that's who this population is. So. So,
I think that's...
Is it me?
Yes, it is.
Okay, next slide, please. I think you might need to click it again. 2 more times. Okay, I didn't know it was animated. So,
I do have one last thing.
Yeah.
And it was a fiscal question. In the case of Running Start, the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges did do an evaluation, and they, based upon a student accessing Running Start and completion of 1 year's worth of credit, it was, and the 2011-12 numbers, full-time equivalent, which was about 12,000 some odd number of students, there was a savings to a tuition savings to parents and students of $45 million, and to taxpayers, 42. So I really appreciated that question and comment about cost. I don't have that breakdown, but it's a state board, and so I'll get you that link.
So this next slide this is an analysis we did a few years ago, so the data is a couple years old, but if anything, the number's probably gone up on this. So as some of you may know, the College Board does an analysis when they release their scores around AP, and they have an analysis called AP Potential. And what it does is it takes their PSAT scores and looks at how many students who took the PSAT but did not take an AP exam or course might have received credit had they taken an AP course and exam. And so it's sort of a hypothetical analysis. And so we decided, well, what happens if we take that one step further? And so we took those students, and the estimate from College Board includes scores, 3, 4s, 5s, et cetera. And so we took that one step further, and we took those numbers, and we put them up against the University of Washington AP policy. How many credits would this add up to if all these students that College Board had identified as AP potential students actually got the credit? And we used University of Washington because it was readily available, and it was also a pretty thorough policy. So they had all the subject areas and everything was clear. So at any rate, so when we did the math, it works out that with that analysis, an additional 5,000 FTE worth of students, so this is about the size of a community college in Washington, could have been, about that number of credits could have been awarded had these students had access to the courses and the exams. So this really kind of stood out for us as kind of an example of, okay, there's a lot of potential here that we're missing, and kind of encouraged us to kind of continue to dig on some of this work. And this is due to be updated, but we haven't done that yet. So, but like I say, if anything, that number will go up a little. let's see. Oh, next slide, please. I keep pushing the button, and it's just not working. So then that leads back into the conversation around the roadmap, and one of the strategies we identified in there, actually, in our development of our roadmap, which is our 10-year strategic plan for the state in terms of how we move the arrow on educational attainment, we had a number of work groups, one of which was looking at transitions from high school to college, and this issue came up kind of innocently enough. It came up out of our workforce sector. They were concerned about tech prep because the federal funding had gone away, and we looked at the numbers. Only about 1 in 5 students were getting credit for tech prep. You know, they'd enroll, but they wouldn't get the credit. And so we started to dig deep into that. See, there's some stuff going on in this class or in this program that doesn't make sense. You know, I can be sitting next to Mike, and he's getting college credit, and I'm not, but we're in the same classroom. Why is this happening? So this was kind of the basis for our investigation. As we looked a little deeper, we realized, well, some of that occurs in some of these other programs as well, and there are other barriers that are occurring in these other programs. So we expanded this notion out to say, let's look at dual credit generally, and how do we make this system work a little bit more smoothly and a little bit better if we put it sort of a student lens on this. If I'm a student, what's fair for me and what makes sense for me? So that's kind of where we came to this. And so next slide, we identified 5 issues that we thought really needed to be addressed if we were to design a fair and equitable dual credit system. And first, real simply, clear information about what these options are. Minimize the cost barriers. This issue where if in college and high school, the reason I might not be getting the credit Mike's getting is because I didn't pay the tuition and he did, you know. And in Running Start, I got to get myself to the school. I've got probably to pay for books, and I have some other issues there that might be issues. And so, you know, depending on which program is available to me as a student, I'm going to have different kinds of barriers. The 3 programs that are curriculum and test based, the test cost is the primary cost driver there. And then, but we also need to make sure that the programs remain high quality, that the institutions have adequate funding. So we can't just, you know, chop the bottom out and say, oh, you can't charge tuition. You know, there's got to be a little more nuanced answer than that. And then ensuring, again, the broadest range of students options. This comes up, you know, Mike had mentioned this idea of automatically enrolling students in the next most rigorous course. Well, the next question becomes, which one is that? Is that the tech prep course? Is that the AP course? Is that the Running Start course? You know, so what, and so it gets a lot more complicated very quickly, especially when you're looking at these dual credit options. And then to take the barriers out of getting college credit. And again, this goes back to that example. I think the worst offender on this, from what I understand, is the tech prep, where you have a really complicated articulation process that's school to school, faculty to faculty. And the other programs are a little clearer generally. But then we also have some issues around consistency, where if I get a 5 on my Spanish AP exam, at University of Washington, I'm going to get 15 credits. At another college, I might get 5 credits, I might get 10 credits, I might get, you know, we're on the quarter system, by the way, so that's where the 15 comes from. But so anyway, there's that inconsistency there. And by the way, I would never get a 5 on a Spanish exam, but that's okay.
It's in the record now.
Yes, just to correct the record there. So at any rate, that's kind of the framework that we started from, and actually we expect to see a bill dropped in the next day or so that basically tells us to do this, to design a system and make a recommendation that meets these criteria. Our session starts on Monday, and we just met with the legislator yesterday, so we think we're going to see that very soon.
And, excuse me, but in looking over the information that you sent earlier, it seems to me that you also included something that talked about increasing the number of counselors that were available to students. This was not just, we're going to put this information out and you get it if you can. It was, we're going to proactively go after having enough counselors available. In our system, I mean, I was talking with a counselor last night, and she was talking about the fact that she's dealing with about 450 kids.
Right. Yeah, and we have a strategy identified in the roadmap around student support, which includes increasing counselors. We don't expect to see that happen tomorrow. We do have a funding model that Mike might be able to talk a little bit more about in our system that says kind of what the allocations to the institution, to the K-12 is supposed to buy, but I think in practice, we're not getting as many counselors even as that formula is supposed to fund, but even there, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. There's also room for other ways to get information to student if we're not getting the human-to-human contact. That is probably the ideal, but we need to find other ways to make this more transparent and easier to access for students beyond that. So providing clear online information for students, simplifying the program so it's easier for them to know what their options are and how to access those options and get the credit are also part of that broader initiative.
But I mean, it's not just the information, it's also the analysis of the information.
Right.
You were just talking about 3 different options that a student might take in that situation. Getting a sense of how to determine which one might be best for that student is something that you are not going to get online.
Absolutely.
One of the programs that the legislature had supported for about the last 6 years in Washington is one called Navigation 101. We've now rebranded it Career Guidance Washington, and we only have dollars available through the legislature currently for distribution, dissemination of the curriculum and so forth. And it's an advisory-based kind of system around which we, school counselors provide primary leadership in a model like that because they can do that analysis. But there are others that can be empowered to raise the knowledge level and the background of students as well as the instructors themselves that are trying to create relevant context for students and what they're learning to what might happen next. And so that is still something that's practiced in hundreds of our schools. Specific to the funding formula, currently in the state of Washington through Department of Ed data, it's about 510 students for every school counselor. The legislature, through the Quality Education Council, which had been established to deal with staffing recommendations, has that staffing number for funding to bring the high school counselor to student ratio down to 299 to 1, and the middle school just a little bit more than that. And so there is recognition on the part of the legislature about the importance of the guidance aspect of this. Data is just data until someone can help give meaning to it. And there's not one particular way to do that, and I think that's what Randy's addressing. We've got a lot of great partners out there, like College Success Foundation and others that have just been really instrumental in partnering with schools to help beef up that guidance aspect because there isn't enough school counselors.
And part of what we've been talking about and are looking at now is the idea of every adult in the building advises students. Every adult that comes into contact with students needs to have the information clearly available to them, and they need to know how to clearly message the information to the students so they know what their choices are, so that the whole building becomes one of a college-going culture. So it's not, you can't just put the materials out there and expect that people are going to pick them up and understand it, whether that's the student, the parent, or the teacher. So it definitely has to have the professional development component.
But I want to reinforce something you said too, which is that we were actually talking about this on the car on the way down, which is this idea that which dual credit option you choose has consequence for a given student. The example we were talking about is many of these programs where you're dual enrolled, like running START or college and high school, aren't going to be well recognized by certain kinds of institutions. When you go out of state, some privates or highly selective institutions won't recognize that credit. And so for a student whose goal is to go to one of those kinds of institutions, they need to know that. And they would probably be better served with an IB or AP course if they want to actually get the credit for the course. So that's, I think those kinds of considerations are detailed enough that you probably do need that highly trained counselor who understands those implications. Some of the other decisions might be a little less consequential, or they might be able to find the answers through other avenues as well. So I think that's an important element, though.
Can I ask a question, Maureen? When you talk about staff development opportunities, how are your K-12 schools, let's say your high school structure, to allow for, because everyone says teachers need staff development opportunities, and I agree with it, but where do they find the time to get that? Is what happens in your state?
I'll ask Mike. But I'll tell you that the conversation has come out of some other conversation that we're having around really focusing on senior year counts as a campaign. And that was where we've been having this conversation about increasing the professional development for all folks who are coming in contact with the students. But as far as the number of days of professional development,
I'm talking about the time. So, what we struggle with is by the time teachers get the prep time, they're entitled to, it seems to be one of the ways that people are finding time for professional development is for kids not to come to school, which of course, you're competing interests there. So have you figured out a good model for that? Or are you still trying to figure that out too?
I think it's an ongoing struggle.
Yeah, some of that's locally bargained too, as you know, in terms of how many days of development. And getting access to those days is actually a little more difficult than doing a separate project. So we run the federal Title II program out of our office as well. And in that instance, usually we're buying the time. That's how we get it. So we either pay them a stipend in the summer or we buy substitutes during the academic year. And that's how we can get them. But it costs a lot more when you have to deliver it that way, because you're spending your money on substitutes or stipends rather than on content. So go ahead to the next slide, please. I'm going to ask Noreen to talk real briefly, but one of the issues that we did not put on our list was faculty qualifications. We talked about it in our group, and there's really, there are rules around this, but in terms of making substantial changes to this, the institutions really don't want our help in telling them who they can hire, we've discovered. So it's not on the list, but it's not out of the conversation. So let me say it that way. And I think it is an important piece, especially if we're not quite sure what the end game is on some of these programs, but if the end game is that we essentially rewrite the statute governing the programs that we have on the books now, then that conversation has to come back in. So I want to mention that. Noreen was going to talk real briefly on some of the work we're doing to kind of guide or govern us. Is we have our council, and our council has now established a set of committees, but then in addition to that we have what's called the Improving Student Learning at Scale Grant Collaborative, and Noreen can just talk real briefly about what that is and who's at the table for that, because that is directly related to the work we're doing in dual credit.
It really leads up to the work in dual credit. It's the ISLS grant is a National Governors Association grant, and the state team members include representatives from the Governor's Office, the Student Achievement Council, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, legislators, State Board of Education, State Board for Community and Technical Colleges, our Council of Presidents, which represent the 6 public baccalaureates. And then we have some other partners who've also been a part of the discussions. The Workforce Board has been there. But those were the 7 who were the key state team members to start with. And when you can get the leads of those agencies together in one room, that's an accomplishment to begin with. And so what we did is we have these convenings so that we're together in one room, people who are the policymakers, who can communicate about what's happening around implementation of the Common Core. How are the teachers getting their professional development? What are the other issues that are happening around Common Core? Leading up to how are we going to use the 11th grade assessment to inform 12th grade choices, including dual credit? How are we going to use the 11th grade assessment to perhaps exempt students from remediation at the college level? So those discussions can happen when we have the people, policymakers in the room. So this is a communication and coordination group, and it's really about aligning the policies and also looking at all of the work that's going on all over the state and saying where are the gaps or where are the overlaps or where can we build on this project by connecting it with this other project. So that's in a nutshell.
So one last thing before I hand it off to Tim, which is we are also just now in the process of building our content expert team on this. And so we'll be drawing from institutional folks who are familiar with and work directly in dual credit and building a team around that will kind of make recommendations up the chain so that we can put together an set of options that make sense for the system. So with that, I think
I have one question for you. Looking back at the legislation you passed in 2013, it looks like you're using some funding to sort of say, here's to help the students out, to get some teacher training, to pay those fees, and then half of it you've set aside as sort of an incentive fund.
Yes.
And I'm curious as to what your projections were on what that impact would be, and how you determined that that was really going to help you move the mark, and what do you expect it will do over time? Do you have a gradated, anticipated impact?
Well, I'm not sure I can fully answer for the legislative intent in terms of their specific language. One of the things I think that they're wanting to test is, as these students show that they are capable based upon these assessments, these college career readiness assessments, that in fact that we actively engage them in the kinds of programs that draw them closer and into dual credit options across a broad spectrum. And so the way they attempt to do that through this legislation is to provide first these competitive grants. If you've got a policy like that, knowing that there's going to be guidance involved and there's going to be an opt-out provision if a high school and beyond plan and the parent and students say, hey, no, we've got a different direction to go with this, that then this competitive grants, I mean, it's a total pool of $475,000, and the grants ranging from $1,900 to $10,000 a year. And it's really to what are the kinds of things that you are going to do in support of that new board policy. Local school districts had to adopt the board policy to become eligible for these grants, basically saying that is our belief system locally, is that we will move these students automatically with the option to back off from that decision in the hands of the parent and student. And so that was their golden ticket to access these competitive grants to show their stuff. What are the things you're going to do? They're going to draw in these underrepresented student populations, your free and reduced lunch populations. My accountability to the legislature is to report back to them on an annual basis about what does that look like and what difference does it make in terms of those numbers by all these different variables that we've been talking about today in terms of not just participation but performance as well. The last part of that incentive grants is they do wish to institutionalize this. They want to be able to recognize achievement in the dual credit arena by local schools. Right now, though, I think that they're with $475,000, assuming, I'm just pulling this out of my hat, 100,000 students, it's $4.75 per unduplicated count. However, it's testing a belief system too about what's important, and so that's an interpretation from someone who's administering the program.
Thanks.
I'm just assuming you're
Yeah, I think
tracking
we're just closing up now with an insight from Tim. Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So again, Tim Stetter from the University of Washington. This has been a really rich conversation already, and you're hitting on some of the key topics around access, student success, teacher professional development, funding. So I wanted to share just a little bit about one of the models in our state, which is College in the High School. It's a program, the model that's really grown in our state. There are more than a dozen programs operating this year with new colleges and universities also planning this kind of program model, essentially where the high school teachers are approved and then trained by an academic department on a campus to offer an official college course for official transcripted college credit for those students who register. So our UW in the high school program this year, we're working with more than 100 high schools and more than 5,000 students to do that. And so there's the model of Running Start, where students are leaving to go to a community or technical college in general. We'd like to rebrand this one as the Running in Place model, in that students are doing college coursework right there at their high school. These are all great options. just a little bit more about this college and the high school program and how it works. It really relies on partnerships between the high schools and the academic departments. So there's training, there's curriculum that is shared between the two, and actually we find that sometimes the college faculty who are going into these high school classrooms to observe the classes as they're taught in the high school, they're bringing back best practices from the teachers. So it's a two-way street. It's really helping with articulation between college and the high school levels. This model was actually developed way back in the 60s nationally, and in our state, our program started in the early 80s, so it predates Running Start. And one of the cool things about the college and the high school model is that a student is not having to leave the high school classroom or the high school setting, still has access to their guidance counselor, and is able to earn college credits over the course, the entire course, so all the tests and the quizzes and those kinds of things. We see a success rate that is very high for students actually earning college credit. So each year it's more than 90% of the students who register for UW credit through our program successfully earn a 2.0 or higher, which is higher than you'll see with any AP exam and credit awarding policy. But with this model, there are some real challenges. As Randy and others mentioned, this is not a state-funded program, so we run these programs as self-sustaining, fee-based models, which means that we charge the students. In some cases, the schools are tapping their parent-teacher association, raising community funds, or even tapping into grants to help those students to pay those fees. But each college and the high school program has to set a fee. Ours, that just happens to be the most expensive in the state. And as far as cost analysis, this year we're charging, for one course, it's $352 for a 5-quarter credit course. So about $70 a quarter credit. And so strong success rate with that model. What else did I want to mention about this?
Can I ask a question about that, just in terms of equity? And so I started thinking about families who can't afford to pay that, and so what happens for those children?
Yeah, this is, I think, part of the broader discussion around really streamlining dual enrollment and how can we level some of this, because anecdotally, at least from our program, we can see that in a classroom, say all of you sitting in that room right now, for every 3 who, or let's say for every 4 students there, only 1 is actually registering for University of Washington credit through our program. So there is this equity and access issue. We can't run a course for less than we currently charge through this program. We do have successfully gotten different grants to launch different programs where we can subsidize students in that particular course, but our course fee has only gone up $10 in the last 4 years in order to make it as accessible as possible. But we rely on the schools and the districts to really help subsidize students, and there are many cases of that happening across the state. So to answer your question, yes, it is definitely an access issue for students registering for credit. I mean, all the students in the classroom are getting a college level experience, but at the end of the day, registering, setting up a university transcript, earning those credits that can be transferred widely, that's a big deal breaker for some students who can't afford to do that. I should also mention, as far as access, ours and several others are statewide. We are in some very small rural schools, as well as many large urban schools, public and private. We actually have 1 tribal school partner this year. One of the smallest schools we work with is south of Olympia, and in one of our classes there are only 6 students total in the class, and that is the break-even amount for us, and all 6 of those students registered for University of Washington credit, so we're able to run that. But there are definitely challenges, as was brought up earlier, with rural schools potentially not having qualified faculty, or potentially not having enough students and student interest to set up a course, or certainly in our case, having enough students who are able to pay. So I want to go to the next slide just to point you to one key resource with this model. Nationally, this goes by the term concurrent enrollment, where a high school faculty person is teaching a college course in the high school setting. And there is a national alliance of concurrent enrollment partnerships There is one NACEP accredited program in Oregon. It's the Challenge program out of Portland State. And so NACEP is the national body that looks at standards and best practices because as these programs are growing both in Washington State and nationally and likely in Oregon as well, we have to also look at the rigor, the quality of these courses. So there's been a lot of thinking around how do you set up these programs so that the teachers are getting the professional development that they need. The students are being assessed in the same way. The curriculum is up to the campus standards. So this is one resource I'd point you towards as far as quality around this program model. I know that a number of people in Oregon are definitely aware of this organization. We actually hosted the NACEP conference here in Seattle 2 years ago, and there were at least 20 people from Oregon, from various colleges and universities who showed up at that. So there may be others in your state who are looking at the NACEP standards and potential NACEP accreditation. So those were just a few of the remarks that I wanted to make, but I'll open it up if there are any questions on this college and the high school model and how we run it in Washington State.
Senator Hass has a question.
Yes, thank you for participating. I was wondering, the college and high schools, do students also get high school credit for those courses?
They do. So these classes all run during the high school year, during the high school day, and so all students in the class are earning high school credit. It's only those students who register through our program or through another college and high school program who would earn the college credit as well.
Thanks.
Other questions? David?
Has any consideration been given to online concurrent enrollment?
Great question. We have one course that has been approved for online, and we are hoping that that is going to run either as an online or as a hybrid course next year in several districts. That's a biology course on addiction that was funded through a grant from the National Institutes of Health to promote online instruction for high school students around drug abuse and addiction. And so that's a University of Washington biology course that we are hoping will go online, and that opens up then the possibility that at the district level, one school could, or even at the ESD or the larger school district level, that they could host a site, and then students from various high schools could actually enroll in that course taught by one instructor. So we're very hopeful that that model could open up for us to enable more access for rural students in particular.
And just to clarify, that's a live broadcast of an existing course at a university? It's not asynchronous?
No. It's a course that is built out in a learning management system, and the high school teacher would serve as the instructor for that, where there would be scheduled meeting times. There are online labs that are already developed, and so that would be a live online synchronous course taught by a high school teacher that's approved and trained by the university, and the high school students are all enrolled in that and participating through the learning management system.
If I could add just real quickly, in Running Start, 52% of the Running Start students participated in one or more online courses in 2012-13. So.
And have you done an analysis on that in terms of how that looks across your groups of students, both gender,
No.
race, language,
Good question.
economics?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I think we want to also just thank you all for presenting, and also to continue a dialogue across state lines as we pursue very similar endeavors. Hopefully we can learn from each other. I'm particularly intrigued to find out whether or not the incentive funding does have a long-term effect on how high schools work through those processes. But are there any other questions or comments before we bring our other out-of-state guest up? And any closing remarks that you would like to make?
Just to thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to come down and talk with you, and we're looking forward to hearing the rest of the agenda as well. So,
Yeah, on behalf of the Oregon Education Investment Board, I just really want to thank you. These are really important questions that we're thinking about just in terms of really meeting our 40-40-20 goals. So we appreciate the partnership, and we definitely want to share back. When I listen to you, there's many things you're sort of out in front of us on, and there's things that I think we could also share with you that it might be useful for moving your students along their pathway too. So.
Yes, I think we've already got some ideas from this conversation. We look forward to more, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Several of us had an opportunity through a meeting sponsored by the Education Commission of the States to engage in a dialogue with our next guest, Matt Gianeschi, who is currently a vice president at ECS, brought a tremendous amount of experience from his work in Colorado, both within the governor's office and helping to craft and develop legislation. But then also at the presentation that several of us were beginning to see, we were able to hone in on some of your best practices that you've learned over time. And this is an opportunity for Matt to not only share the Colorado experience, but also to update you on some resources that are newly available, like this week, from ECS, and to share with us ways that we could be learning together. Thank you, Matt, for coming over.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Hilda, and Chair Golden and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to join you this afternoon. Again, my name is Matt Gianeschi. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Programs at the Education Commission of the States. Very briefly, the Education Commission of the States, if you're not familiar with who we are a compact that was founded by the states for the states. And so what we do is we provide objective, nonpartisan education policy support and advice to legislators, governors, chiefs, SHIOs, other offices that are working through a variety of issues. Kind of our hallmark, if you will, is our signature kind of analysis is a 50-state review of every state's policies in particular areas. And so we'll go through every single state statutes in a variety of different areas to try to identify what practices are available in the state and try to identify trends that we can share with other states. So part of my presentation will be to discuss that, to show you both Oregon's current evaluation and to make sure that you know that this resource is available to you in case you have questions about what other states are doing, or if you hear ideas of what other states are doing, you want to look it up, show you where to find that. But then I've also been asked to spend some time on the Colorado experience. And so a little bit about, as you heard, my background. I had the privilege to work as an executive in 3 different governor's offices or governor's administrations, 1 Republican, 2 Democrat. So I was able to work across the aisle and work with a lot of different policymakers. One of the biggest bills that we had that we were able to successfully pass in the last decade was a Concurrent Enrollment Programs Act. And so I don't know if the bill itself was shared with the members. It's fairly lengthy, and so I will go through a summary of what it does. But I've been asked to give this presentation actually quite a few places. There's a lot of interest. Dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment is perhaps the number 1 question we get regarding high school college transitions. This is the policy that states throughout the country are wrestling with, and they are looking for answers. And so we try to provide them those answers, and it feels a little bit unusual for me, given that I wrote this legislation and worked on it. Now I get to go talk about it. It's really not self-promotion. It just so happens that that's the model that the states have been asking to take a look at. So let me start with, and do we have the presentation? We can pull it up for the members of the audience, just so they have a sense of what we're talking about. And on the, let me do this in 2 ways. Let's start with Oregon. On the left-hand side of your packet, you'll see that there is this sheet, something like this. It says 50-state analysis. And you don't need to look through this, and this is your own law. But I just want to give you a sense of how colleagues in my office have currently gone through and done a gap analysis of your state, looked at every aspect of your current policy. I have a few on the next slide, which we won't go to at this moment, but a few ideas that you might consider, things that sort of struck me as I read through this of potential opportunities for the state. And again, we are simply in a position to try to raise questions. We are not in a position to lobby, but this is an example of one state, but we've done this for all states. A few things that you might find interesting. 47 states in the country right now have concurrent or dual enrollment policies. So quite a few states have implemented these kinds of policies. Only 22 states, however, guarantee the transfer of the credit from the high schools to the colleges. That's a very big question for a lot of students. And so one that states are now beginning to wrestle with. So as you deal with concurrent enrollment policy, recognize that you're also dealing with lots of other policies too. So these are not, there is a pure dual enrollment. How do we pay for it? How do the students get in? There are lots of other questions as well. How do the students get access? What about data sharing? What about other financial provisions that may impact us? 28 states require parents to pay or districts to pay. We've found that this is actually the biggest trend, is that the removal of this policy is where we're seeing most states trend. Now, it doesn't mean every state has adopted that policy. It just means that as we see states adopting innovations or modifications to their state policies, the trend seems to be in eliminating costs to the student. So they are removing costs on their behalf. I'll get to why we did what we did in Colorado momentarily, but just understand that that is a trend. 5 states right now, the legislature pays through direct appropriation. So in all other cases, it's sort of all over the map. Districts come up with different agreements. Students may pay a portion, maybe not all, but it's not clear in all statute. But that's on the left-hand side of the package you have. If you go to our website, which if we have time, if you care, we can go there. And I can show you, we have a searchable map. You can just pick a state, and it'll help you, and maybe your aides for the legislators. If you decide that this is something interesting, you want to hear what other states are doing, either we can prepare that for you, or you can go yourself and deploy your staff to take a look at that. So now turning to the right-hand side of your packet, you'll see that there is a very brief 2 or I guess 3-page summary prepared by the Colorado Department of Higher Education concerning the House Bill 1319, the Concurrent Enrollment Programs Act. For those members of the audience, the bullet points above in the PowerPoint cover most of the material, and that's most of what I'll be working from. But let me, before I get to this, start with just a little story, and that is concurrent enrollment programs are not new, as you've heard. And in Colorado, we had 4 separate statutes that dealt with dual and concurrent enrollment policy. And what I'm speaking to here is not AP and not IB. I'm talking about just college courses being offered to students. And so think of it as that. We had 4 separate statutes. Those statutes, in some cases, violated constitutional provisions. They weren't challenged, but they did. Some conflicted with each other. Some were internally had their own internal contradictions. And so what we decided to do after a 2-year process, and my charge was, I was working as the advisor to the governor, he said to me, let's just clean it up. Let's start fresh. And so what we did is we went through a 2-year process to engage the stakeholders. We worked with K-12 higher education, we worked with faculty, we worked with counselors, we worked with parents, and we tried to understand, what are your priorities? What are the incentives? How do we build a system that is sustainable, that we don't have to keep reinterpreting or creating new ways to fix the program depending on the circumstances, but let's have one way that we can all make this program work. And the result is House Bill 1319. Interestingly, and again, for legislators or former legislators, you may find interesting, this legislation is the only bill I've ever worked on that never had a single vote against it. It was a 100-0 vote. In fact, I was teaching a graduate class not too long ago, and one of the students said, what was one of your proudest accomplishments? And I said, when I was up in the gallery watching this legislation go through, and I saw one of the most conservative members of the Education Committee go to the well and say, this is the most important piece of legislation of this session. And then he went and sat down. And one of the most liberal members of the same committee came down to the well and said, this is the most important piece of legislation of the session. And so we were able to reach consensus. Now, what does it do? This bill is an entire overhaul of the state's dual enrollment program. It's filled with trade-offs, and the trade-offs were we would create consistency across from school to school. So we, in some ways, I guess, a critic might say, well, you eliminated the sort of local choice in how they design their programs. I don't know if that's entirely true, but the idea was create consistency because the confusion is actually a barrier to our progress. Principals don't know how to interpret the law. Some principals don't know what to do with one section of statute or another section of statute, and it was creating so much chaos. that we felt like we had to create something that was going to be create more utility. This legislation, as you'll see here, we eliminated all age and grade level requirements. So it doesn't matter if you're a 9th grader, it doesn't matter if you're a 12th grader. We said any student, upon demonstrating your readiness to enter a college course, go to the college course. And what we were trying to say was, what incentive does the state have to postpone that entry? We want those students to accelerate, so let's accelerate them. Let's give them a choice. And having arbitrary standards like being 17 years old, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm a former faculty member, and I've taught at a community college, and I had 40-year-olds who hadn't been in a classroom setting for 20 years, and I had 16-year-olds who were some of the most mature, articulate students that I'd ever seen. And so I'm not sure that having age and grade standards is the way to go from a state side. That's the way that we approached it, and so we eliminated that from our side. We also created uniform financial policies, and this was really important for our K-12 system. They needed to have some way in which they could wrestle with financial, both the amount to which they would pay so that they understood what they were getting into, so that they could plan appropriately year to year, so that the K-12 principal could say, I'd like to see 5 new courses offered in my high school. They knew what that meant, and it wasn't going to be subject to the negotiations with a new president or a new system or a different interpretation of what it should be. We authorized double payment between K-12 and higher education. This was initially controversial, but the woman who was here earlier, I don't know her name, asked the question about cost models. We did a cost analysis and demonstrated to our legislature that any time we pay for a credit-bearing course in high school, we will reduce the long-term cost to the state in every event. And just because we have guaranteed transfer of those courses, and college has never become less expensive to the state. And so we can assume, even if it's only inflation, we're still saving the state money. So it was a cost saver in the longer term, and it was something we just all had to accept. We required that the students have some pressure here too. The students had to demonstrate that the courses satisfied their what we call ICAPs, and that's the individual career and academic plan. We have a requirement in our state that all 8th graders have to complete an individual career and academic plan. It says, I would like to go into this kind of career, and it articulates for that student the kinds of courses that they'll need to take in order to gain entry into those kinds of programs, so that they had to demonstrate this wasn't a willy-nilly, I'll take any courses just because they sound interesting. They had to demonstrate that these fit into the kinds of courses that they were looking for. We eliminated prepayment requirement. We used to have a law that said that the parents would pay up front, and then they would be later reimbursed upon passing the course. We found out by looking at the numbers that effectively eliminated any low-income students from ever even going into these courses. And so we said, for equity purposes, we're going to pay in full. And it's going to be a universal policy for all students. The result of that particular policy is that our low-income minority students in Colorado are actually overrepresented in our dual enrollment population, not underrepresented. So they're actually higher than their overall population within the K-12 community, something we're very proud of. But it gave the high schools the ability to give the incentive of free college to students and for them to understand how that would work on their behalf. Also, the number of students. This program, once we implemented this, went from about 5,000 students statewide to almost 30,000 students now. That's 4 years later. So very dramatic growth in the program. We added the authority to allow remedial courses in the 12th grade year, and I know that Oregon I believe it does allow non-credit courses, which could be interpreted as a remedial course, but we were being very explicit about it and saying, if we know that an 11th grader, after taking an ACT or an SAT, they need remediation, let's give it to them. Let's not wait. It's just going to cost us more, and the outcomes are likely going to be even more challenging if we postpone entry into those courses, and so let's go ahead and at least give the option. And then perhaps most interesting to many people is that we created a formal 5th-year program. Now, 5th-year programs exist, and I know Oregon actually does have some innovations in this area. We had the same, and what we decided to do was let's go ahead and bring them out into the sunlight, and say to everybody, hey, we actually like these programs, but we also need them to be accountable. We also need them to be fiscally responsible. We need to know what the effect of these kinds of programs what they are, so that we can actually build these programs and we can show that these are good investments for the legislature. And so we created what's called the Ascent Program. And you'll see in this description, this little two-pager gives a description of it, but this is not just a fifth year for anyone. Students have to earn their way in, but it's not a merit-based program. This is a credit accumulation program. So the incentive was students that earn 12 or more credit hours and don't need remediation. Those are the only criteria for eligibility. If you earn one semester, more or less, of college credit and you don't need remediation, we will give you a scholarship for the fifth year. Now, the high schools also liked it because what we were able to do is we were able to put them into the per pupil operating revenue. These are students that are counted in the states on the K-12 count, although we had to adjust the count so that we removed all the at-risk factors and any of the size factors and other things that were in our School Finance Act. And they got base funding, but they were able to, the incentive to the high school is they won't lose money. They'll actually be able to pay full tuition, but the students from the state side, we're getting college-ready students that already have at least a semester to accelerate. And so this fifth-year program started out with about 100 students in the first year, and I believe now it's approaching, I want to say it's about 1,000 students at this point. So it's not huge, but for certain schools, this is a very dramatic program for them. New accountability and requirements, as well as we created consistency through districts and state agencies. Let me take one moment here and say that one of the things that we realized in trying to draft this legislation is that in spite of how big it is, we're still going to miss things. We just are, and that's how it is, and we recognize that. And so what we did is we actually created a separate board. And it wasn't to build bureaucracy. It was an advisory board. They're what we call a type 2 board, and they're a non-rulemaking board in our state. But what they have is advisory authority to the State Board of Education and so in your case, your state board and then the HEC board. And maybe the Oregon Education Investment Board. I'm not entirely clear on what that structure would look like here. But what we did is we said, let this group, it's called the Concurrent Enrollment Advisory Board. They're going to be the ones to wrestle with the implementation issues that come up. And they're going to be the ones that they can really, they're practitioners, they're experts, they're counselors, they're teachers, they understand these issues, and they can help alert us to potential problems that are in the policy, and then bring those challenges both to the legislature in an annual report, and they send over to the legislature, hey, here are 3 things you need to change. That date you put in there doesn't work, and so can you please revise this to help the practitioners? But this board meets every month, and the charge of the board is simply to make sure that the implementation is as smooth as it can be and to make recommendations for changes. So we didn't assume we were going to get everything right the first time. We created a board to do that. One of the products of the board, I gave you a copy on the right-hand side of your packets, and I just wanted to show you the kind of thing that we did to try and support the districts. We're Colorado and Oregon, and frankly Washington. I think our states are so similar. In fact, I think there's so many ways in which our states are darn near. And so those are the 3 states I think you can put together and make sense of sort of the challenges that they face. Colorado, we have the same kind of urban-rural challenges that you have, and very rural and very remote in some of our states. Or some of our areas. And what we decided to do was we recognized that many of those small school districts don't have the legal counsel or the other support to develop new articulation agreements, to develop new enrollment agreements. And so let's take the burden off of them. Let's come up with a common practice where we could have a boilerplate, and this is just the boilerplate, enrollment agreement. And this is an agreement that this has been reviewed by the Attorney General's office. It's been signed off. Everybody understands that everything that's spelled out in here is appropriate. And then we left blank on the last page an addendum for the fiscal provisions. And the reason why we did this, and these are the kinds of things that are coming out of the board, that the advisory board said, you know what, we just need to make this available to the districts because they don't have the time. The principals don't have that kind of capacity. So let's make it as easy as possible for them to implement. And so this is one of the kinds of products that they put together to try and help the school districts. So a couple of other things, and then I'll take questions. You'll see here I said policies that enabled progress. And these are things that are different in every state, but I just wanted to be transparent and say, why was this so successful in our state? Part of it was our laws that are not found in this, and that built upon, or this was built upon the foundation of other laws. One is we have common remedial placement standards in the state. It allowed us to have consistency so that every student, we identified what college ready meant. It meant the same thing, high school to high school, college to college, course to course. We recognize what that means in college readiness, so admission criteria are consistent in recognizing what these courses are. Data sharing agreements and authorizations are in state law, and they're very explicit. And they say that there is no prohibition in our state for sharing student unit records for the purpose of enrolling a student or for evaluation. And the reason that this enrollment piece was so important for us, I had the privilege, after writing this law, it's an interesting twist, I became the vice president of a community college where I ran the state's largest program. And so I had to kind of figure out how to deal with the volume. We had about 3,000 students enrolled at our one community college, concurrent enrollment students at 3,000. And so the paperwork was just daunting. And my registrar's office just hated me because I was constantly building the program, and she would come scream at me. Any of you who work with registrars know what I'm talking about. And she was really upset and said, you have to stop growing the program. I said, no, we're actually going to build the program. But what we ended up doing was, because of the state authorities, we could work with our school districts, and they gave us their entire student unit record data drop into our system. And we didn't use it until the students came over. And then the principal would send a letter over to me, electronically of course, and say, here are all the student numbers that are registered for this fall. And all I would do is pull up their information. So there was no application at that point. All I'd have to do is just electronically pull all the records up. And so those are the kinds of things that were enabled by other laws that allowed us to do that. The other thing is something you may not know is Colorado has a lifetime limit on college credit. So the state pays for only 145 college credits. And that's semester hours, not quarter hours. I know there are quarter systems up here. So 145, the average baccalaureate degree is 120, obviously. We've really not run into any problems with this. We do find students who occasionally go over, but it's really not a dramatic challenge. But what that allowed us to do was demonstrate to the legislature that students were effectively actually electing to take less expensive state appropriations in high school rather than future appropriations under that 145 credit hour cap. And so I want everyone to know that we don't have unlimited credit hour for the state. And then finally, guaranteed transfer. Colorado has a very robust policy. It's called GT Pathways, Guaranteed Transfer Pathways. And it is a course-by-course transfer guarantee. Every course is a little bit different in how they phrase them, but an English course is an English course is an English course. I don't care what you call it. Once it has what we call a GT stamp, it's reviewed by faculty at the state. Once it has that, it is 100% durable, and it has the authority of the state. So we can go and make sure that course will in fact transfer to any institution in the state, even the most selective institutions. That guarantee has been helpful for our college students, but it's been extremely valuable for our high schools, because the high schools, the principals need to go talk to the parents. And they're the ones that need to say, I know that you're enrolling at my old college, Community College of Aurora. It's a non-selective urban, community college. There's nothing special or different about it. But maybe it's a highly selective or an affluent high school, and they want their kids to go to CU Boulder, and they really want their kids to go to Colorado School of Mines. This gave those parents the awareness, or at least the guarantee that even though they're enrolling at the Community College of Aurora, that calculus course is guaranteed to have comparability, so equivalent comparability at the receiving institution. It just became a very important element of that. So I'll stop there and take any questions that you might have. And if we have time, I have a few other things I can show you. But that's kind of the Colorado story, kind of where we are, how we got there, and I'm happy to sort of share ideas on what you might want to think about.
So Senator Hass has a question.
Yep.
Well, I very much appreciate you saying there was a lot of trade-offs here, and I think between the lines you were saying we're not going to solve all of the world's problems or give you 100% of everything that we need. I was just wondering, we hear a lot about, well, instead of college, kids need technical training, and how do you deal with a community college course that might be, auto painting or an Intel computer chip assembly line certificate pipeline? How you're not including those kinds of things when you talk about dual credits or concurrent credits, are you?
Senator, actually we are. I had a senator in my state, Senator Raleigh Heath, who is a former advanced manufacturing person, and he said, you need to let me carry a CTE bill. And so we actually peeled off part of this bill and put it into one for him, and it is explicit, and it says career and tech ed is always authorized for payment. And the logic we use, because our old law used to say, in effect, these are only for the traditional liberal arts and sciences and transfer, quote, transfer courses for 2 or 4 year baccalaureate programs. And we wanted to change that. And we said, why would we, as a state, say that we need to double the number of college degrees earned in our states and certificates? And we're willing to pay for the student even if they're a high school dropout. Maybe it's unique to my state, but you could drop out of high school and enroll and get a GED, or go into a community college and do an ABE and earn your way into a certificate program the state will pay. I said, well, that's a perverse incentive. Why would we want you to drop out to go take the CTE program that you really want? Like, let's go ahead and let you take it now. If this is something you want and it fits into your academic plan, go for it. And in particular, some of our urban high schools have really found that's been valuable to them, because they can't afford to offer those kinds of programs. Those are high-cost programs. The amount of technical equipment that they have to buy, they just can't keep up with it. And so what we were able to do is create partnerships where you can completely authorize students to go full-time anywhere they want, and that was one way that they did it.
But how would it work then? Would they get concurrent high school credit for an auto paint class? How would that part of it work?
It would just be a high school elective. Yeah. So, but it applies to the certificate. So for the student doesn't notice anything different. The student is now a college student in the course, and so it allows them to do that. I know, and Hilda had mentioned faculty qualifications. You heard the right thing. Washington's doing great stuff, and really one of the leaders in the country in a lot of ways. Faculty qualifications, just a quick story about this. This is one area that we left to the institutions and the accrediting bodies and just said, you're going to have to figure this out. And they need to be college faculty qualified according to your own standards. Curiously, our program grew so much in the community college I was at that we had a visit from our regional accreditor. And they came to visit us and said, hey, we think 4 of your high schools should be accredited as college sites. And we said, okay, come on over. And so they came out and they did a visit. And the result is that by way of just sort of following the existing practice, we didn't have to do anything at the state. We just said, you're going to follow your own existing accreditation standards for faculty qualifications. And in doing so, we have 4 high schools in Colorado that are actually authorized college sites by our regional accreditor. They can award associate's degrees at those high schools. It's pretty neat that they were able to do that. One other kind of another way to look at the same kind of policy in our act, I can show you if you care. We had to be explicit about authorizing college adjuncts to teach in the high school without a teaching license. And so just in case that comes up in your review and how do you evaluate them, we found that as long as we had state law that allowed college faculty to go into the high schools and that they were exempt from licensure, that satisfied our policy. So we didn't have to put them through a separate hoop, and they didn't have to be counted as teachers of record in the high school. They didn't have to get into district master agreements and all the other things that come up that allowed us to do that particular policy.
Other questions?
So let me, if I may, one last thing on finance, because I think you might find this interesting, at least the high school or maybe K-12 folks find this interesting. We found there are 3 ways to offer dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment, maybe 4, depending on how you look at it. One is obviously you have a high school instructor that has the adjunct qualifications that teaches in the high school. That's one way. Another is you send a contract adjunct into the high school. So this is a college employee goes into the high school. Other is that you said the students come to the college, right? Traditional way, and then online. Online's perfectly acceptable, by the way, in Colorado. No problem whatsoever. Lots going on. So what are the motivations? So the one for sending the students to college, that's typically done in the instance where they need the lab, they need the facilities that aren't available in the high school. And I have to tell you, there are high schools that have better lab facilities than we had at the college. So we actually prefer to have them over at the high schools in some cases. So that's sometimes true, or maybe it's the art equipment or something else that they needed and they just aren't going to be able to replicate. Sending a contract employee into the schools and being clear about that. One thing that we learned in doing that was that we could help the districts as we planned. So I would sit down with the superintendent of a school district and we'd say, hey, what do you want for next year? And they'd say, I really need someone in my school, but I can't hire a Latin instructor. Can you help me? And I'd say, sure, actually, I have 5 Latin adjuncts that could come in, as long as you pay them typical adjunct fees, which are not huge. We can build your curriculum for you, and then you're under no requirement to keep them. And so it allowed the district some flexibility to maybe help fill the gaps for students that may have a unique, maybe only 5 or 10 students want a particular course. You could fill that course and not feel like you're at a sort of loss and having to make a choice. And then the last one, having the instructors in the schools, we actually found that our school districts changed their hiring practices. And so we found most of our school districts made adjunct status the preference for K-12 teaching in a secondary environment. And what that allowed them to do was get more of their teachers teaching adjunct courses. And the relationship we developed was so at my community college, I used to pay my high schools to teach the course. I didn't pay the course. I paid them for the instructor. So the high schools actually earned money by doing this. And so this was one of the other motivating factors, that the money didn't just come to the college. We took their tuition, but then we paid them for the human capital to have the course, and the facilities, and the overhead. And so it just became this arrangement where we gained a little bit of money, but on their side, I used to routinely write hundreds of thousands of dollars back to the school district and say, thanks for teaching those courses. It's great for us. So just know that there are ways that you can make sure that states can look at this and find a way that create incentives that don't sort of force districts to have to, sort of, again, trade-offs in financial in particular, sort of feel like they have to lose money, or if that's the way they feel, that there's actually a way to do it in a way that's very positive for them.
Other questions? Any committee members on the phone have questions? Okay, so this financial analysis that you did, I mean, what you were able to do with during the legislative session to show that overall it was less costly, are you able to do it? Is your organization, ECS, able to do those kind of analysis for our state?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So my closing line would be, we can come anytime, and we can help. Consider us a research arm to help you, but we help as you tell us what you'd like to look at, and we can do it. Yeah, that's something New Mexico asked for the same thing, and we gave them an analysis, and what we look at, we would just need to agree upon what the parameters are. I can give you the fiscal note to this legislation. It shows there's zero fiscal impact to the state. That's just the way it was developed. So, yeah, we'd be happy to do it. And so, upon request, anytime you have a question, we're happy to help out. And even committee members or legislators, if something moves into committee, we're often called to come in to testify. And again, we don't lobby, but we can provide the national perspective and try to help provide some context to legislation that's moving. So feel free, we're happy to do it. And that's part of what the compact is all about, is to try and help you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and Matt is going to stay behind after this meeting is over. So several of us had some questions about drilling down even more.
Sure.
So we're very grateful for your time.
Thank you.
To stay with us a little bit after our meeting today.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yep.
So we're at public testimony, right?
And we can have the letter.
Yes. And I just want, before we ask our one person who has public testimony to come up, we did give committee members, and we'll get this electronically to the people who aren't here, a letter from the Oregon Writing and English Advisory Committee. The letter came in the same day as our last committee meeting, but not in time for us to get it out. And so fundamentally, what it's concerned about are that students come to community colleges or colleges with the skills to be successful there. So you each have a copy of that, and I just, for the record, wanted to make sure people know we did distribute that to our committee members. So we have one friend who we often see. Very nice to see you. So this is Margaret Delancey. Did I say it right this time? Okay, see, 3 times the charm. So.
Do you want me to come up?
Yes, we would like that very much. So,
Dr. Golden, as she makes her way up, I wanted to also thank the out-of-state guests and to let them know that drinking in all of this information is my colleague here, Senator Bruce Starr, who also happens to be president of the National Conference of State Legislatures. So your audience was maybe wider than you had anticipated.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Margaret DeLacy, and I'm here testifying on behalf of the Oregon Association for Talented and Gifted. And I just wanted to make a couple of very brief points. One is that from our perspective, the problem is from pre-K to 12 and not just a high school program problem. And in particular, we've heard a lot about low-income students today, and early intervention is even more important for low-income and minority students than it is for other students. So I haven't seen in the structure of the OEIB much opportunity to discuss the problem of academic acceleration from K through 12, including early entry to kindergarten. And I'm wondering if there's some opportunity to do that. Second of all, I'd like to just remind I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but I would like to point out that accelerated learning is what OTAG does. We could as easily be called the Oregon Association for Accelerated Learning. I've actually always hated our title. And that we hope that the committee will take advantage of the pool of expertise that's available in your gifted education community. Our gifted education specialist, in fact, comes from Colorado. The families in the state that have the most experience with the acceleration, both the barriers and the benefits, are in the gifted community. And we would be very happy to work with the committee to identify wider community outreach possibilities. I think some of our parents and students would like to participate more in the process. And I'd also like to remind the committee that we did have a TAG task force that identified some of the most significant burdens and challenges facing advanced students in the state. It was called a quiet crisis. It was submitted to the legislature more than a year ago, and we hope that the committee will be interested in working with us to address some of the issues in that report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, so I think we all heard that Matt is staying a little bit longer, and so if you want to speak to him, he will be here. But any last minute comments, questions, concerns? If not, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Next meeting.
Oh, next meeting, yes, thank you. So if you look on your agenda, what you'll see, one question we had about next meeting, which is February 12th. It is during our short session. So we particularly wanted to hear from our legislators if you think it might be good for us to skip that 1 month, just given short sessions. Any thoughts, Lou?
Well, I don't have my schedule for what my committee meetings are like at this particular point. I just don't know.
Same here, so it's hard to know.
Yeah. So why don't we do this? I think we are moving to the point we have lots of work to start doing to bring back to this committee that really lets us look at some of the impacts of potential decisions. So that would give us some time to work on those. We will just go ahead and cancel our February meeting and then make sure we're back together in March. So, and of course we're happy during the session to connect. So, okay with that, thank you very much and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, feel better.